Hello and welcome to NCT On Air. I'm happy that you're here to join us today, and with me I have three wonderful guests from Michigan, Cathy Fleischer, Ethan Konett, and Kelly Burke. And before we jump right in and hear what they have to share talking about disciplinary literacies, a couple housekeeping things. You can follow this broadcast on Twitter to the hashtag NCTE on air. I have that underneath my name here in the event that you forget what that is. And then in addition, if you have any questions during the broadcast, on the side of your screen you can see something that says Q&A. And if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to our question list there, and we'll do our best to get to them in this 45-minute broadcast. Without further ado, I'm going to take a moment to introduce you to our speakers. They are going to talk to you about the experience of an experience they had this summer at the Disciplinary Literacies Institute, where they learned about, or they learned from one another, discussing what it means to write in different disciplines across different grade levels. There were educators from middle school, high school, and college that all came together to have this discussion. And we'll look forward to hearing what they have to say about what they learned there and what that means in the context where they teach. And let's begin by having you introduce yourself. We'll start with Cathy.
Hi, thanks, Jenna. I'm Cathy Fleischer. I'm a professor at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti, Michigan. I'm an English education professor and writing professor. And I'm the co-director of our national writing project site, the Eastern Michigan Writing Project.
We'll go to Ethan.
Hi, I'm Ethan Konett. I am let's see, what am I going to be teaching? I have a new job, so I'm teaching now social studies at Huron High School in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Previously, I have taught middle school and high school in Dexter, Michigan. So that's what I do.
Great. Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly Victor-Burke, and I'm a full-time lecturer and geotourism educator in the Department of Geography and Geology. And I teach our department's writing intensive course, which is Geography of Russia and Neighboring States, as well as I'm teaching courses in geotourism and in general education.
Great, thank you. All right, so we have a wide range of disciplines represented on this call, and let's jump right in. Cathy, if you can talk to us a little bit. I mentioned it a couple times already. What is the Disciplinary Literacies Institute, and how did it get started?
Sure. So the project grew out of a collaboration that we had between our national writing project site, the Eastern Michigan Writing Project, and our university Writing Across the Curriculum program. And it came about because some of us were talking and had a couple of concerns. So the first concern was that whole idea of college readiness. You know, it's being thrown around a lot by Common Core State Standards, and other organizations are all talking about this issue. And we were really wondering, like, what does this mean? You know, what does it mean to be college and career ready in writing? A little bit concerned that it seemed like the people who were talking about this were really not teachers, and that the college level teachers were not involved in a conversation on this with the high school people. And so we were kind of worried, and it felt like nobody's really talking about it, right? It's just this term that's out there, but the people who probably should be talking the most, the high school and the college teachers, weren't talking together about it. So that was one of our concerns. The second concern we had to do with really understanding what disciplinary literacies really means, especially in terms of disciplinary writing. So we know that writing in the content areas has been stressed lately, especially because of Common Core State Standards, when they have, you know, the anchor standards for writing, which have to do with science, social studies, and history, and other technical subjects all grouped together. We'll talk about that a little later. But it ended up, I think, that we were feeling like nobody really quite understood what we meant by disciplinary writing. The teachers we spoke to are really struggling with this, especially teachers in the disciplines. They weren't really sure what they were supposed to do at the high school level. So we started to think together about what could we do to have some conversations starting. So this led to this Disciplinary Literacies Institute, which was 3 days together of middle, high school, and college folks from various disciplines getting together to think together, write together, read together, talk together about both of those things. So what writing looks like within a discipline. So if all the mathematicians got together there, what does writing in math really look like? What does writing in history look like? What does writing in biology look like? As well as how we could use that conversation to start to think about how students make that transition from high school to college. So how they make that transition between high school and college generally in terms of writing, but more specifically how they do that in terms of disciplinary writing.
Great. So I feel like in the context of talking about disciplinary literacy, we also have been hearing this phrase thrown around at the same time people talk about content area literacy, or literacy and literacy across the content areas. Ethan, can you talk a little bit about, in your experience, what is the difference between these different phrases, and then maybe connect that to your experience in the Disciplinary Literacies Institute?
Sure. So I've heard the term writing across the curriculum thrown around for a long time, and I've been a part of different movements to try to get more writing in more content areas. And yeah, it was always called writing across the curriculum. And what it always seemed to be was writing for the purposes of demonstrating knowledge. It didn't really get any deeper into, how does an historian write? What is the particular approach to writing, or what are all the disciplinary needs to get you to that point where you can write like an historian? So there's much more to it than just writing, and writing for the purposes of answering a question on a test or a quiz, or even just a small formative assessment. So I think over the last couple of years, in my mind, and then with this movement to talk about disciplinary literacies, it's more than just writing. It's how do you think like an historian, or how do you think like a mathematician? How do you read like a mathematician? And because I think writing across the curriculum previously was, okay, math teachers, you're going to need to teach some writing too. And the thought was, wait a minute, that's what English teachers do. You teach the writing, we teach the math, and let's stop taking away from my content was a lot of the refrain. And so I think this sort of backs away a little bit and says, well, in actuality, when we do dig into the discipline, when we get outside of that bubble of your classroom, mathematicians do write, and they write quite a bit. And so in order to have our students do, I think, more in-depth work and become good at doing more than just recalling facts and recalling knowledge, asking them to be and to do the things that people in the discipline do. I think it's been quite interesting to see and explore the differences between the two. And we'll see. I don't know how to go about getting people on board with, okay, let's shift to disciplinary literacies from writing across the curriculum. But I think it's a really interesting idea, and there's was a lot of great work done at the Institute to move toward that. So.
Great. Yeah. Cathy, I know you've mentioned before a little bit of the way that you got to have those discussions, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you used some foundational documents to begin that conversation.
Yeah, sure. So we did a lot of things in the actual institute, but one of the things I think that that really hit home and that it helped people was we tried to look across some documents. So we looked across the Common Core State Standards, the Anchor Standards for Writing, which I think probably all the viewers are familiar with. We also then looked at the NCT beliefs about the teaching of writing, which is a document that probably the English teachers are familiar with, but if other people are listening, they probably don't know. But these are research-based list of statements from National Council of Teachers of English, from a committee that worked together to try to say, what do we know in terms of research about writing and writing pedagogy. And so there's a list of beliefs, things like, all kids can and should write, all kids need help getting started writing, writing as a process, things like that. And then the third document we looked at is something called the Framework for Success in Post-Secondary Writing, which, again, might not be as familiar to people, but that was a document that was pulled together by the National Council of Teachers of English, the Council of Writing Program Administrators, those are those people who run first-year writing programs at universities, as well as the National Writing Project. And the idea behind that document was pulling together really hundreds of high school, community college, and college teachers to talk about what do kids really need to know and be able to do in terms of writing? And I was on the committee that wrote that, and one of the things we noticed as we looked across all these hundreds of responses to surveys and interviews that we had done was that it wasn't so much discrete skills, but what it was specific kinds of habits of mind, like flexibility, right? Like perseverance, like metacognition, that it was more these habits of mind that people really needed to have in order to be successful as writers. So one of the things we did in the Institute is that we looked at various kinds of assignments that we had done or assignments that we might want to do and tried to look across these documents at them to see, well, what is it saying to do in the Common Core anchor standards? But what if we add these beliefs about the teaching of writing to that? And what if we add the framework for success to that? What if we add the habit of mind of flexibility to that, for example? What is it that we could do that would really nudge these anchor standards farther and farther, so that we were seeing sort of a bigger picture of what it means to be a writer and to be a successful writer for more than just high school, for more than just tests, but to get into college, to get into career, and get into life.
Great. Yeah, and I'm going to take a moment here just to share this image. Yeah. Everybody who's watching this on-air event, somewhere on your screen you should see something that looks like two little yellow movie tickets. And if you click on that, it will show you the showcase. And there we've uploaded a lot of the documents that Cathy was just mentioning. This is one of them. And I think you mentioned this before, Cathy, but can you just talk briefly about how you used this?
Sure. So if you look in the left-hand column, it's got the MCT beliefs listed, like everybody has a capacity to write, people learn to write by writing, writing is a process, etc. You can see that down the left-hand side. And then what we did is we tried to look at the Common Core state standards, anchor standards for writing, and tried to look about, well, where is there overlap there? Where do things fit in together? And we looked at the same thing for the frameworks, habits of mind, and then sort of looked at disciplinary connections. One, I think, sort of lovely moment in the Institute was when we had everyone pick one of the habits of mind and to try to say, okay, how do I use those habits of mind in the way I teach writing right now, and what do I need to do to really extend that? And we did posters all over the room talking about that. So we started to understand and look at each other's thinking about that, about how we could include those more in the teaching of writing. So I thought it was a pretty good prompt to use to start thinking about some of these kinds of things. And so especially for people who sometimes feel that they're in very rigid standard-based schools, and there's a lot of teachers who are in places where it's interpreted in a very rigid way, that they could start to see how they could use these things to move beyond, and use research-based best practice to try to figure out what else they could do in the teaching of writing.
Great, thank you. We're doing a project right now at NCTE called the Assessment Story Project, where we've asked, I think at this point we have over 500 responses from educators across the country, across different grade levels and disciplines, and we asked them a set of questions about their experiences with assessment. And one of the things that seemed to be a theme across respondents that were speaking from the college perspective was that students were coming to college unprepared to write. And that's not specifically, or that's not what you were saying in your introduction, Cathy, but I would imagine that it's something that was part of your discussion. So I was wondering, Kelly, if you could talk a little bit about your experience at the college level and whether or not that's something you've observed, and then also how your experience with the Disciplinary Literacies Institute and these discussions that Cathy's outlining for us, how you feel like that might fuel maybe the kinds of responses we might see in response to that question in the future.
Absolutely. So throughout my career at EMU, I've often felt that my students were not really prepared to write in geography. And for a long time, I kept thinking that this was because writing was just not being taught, which of course is not true and not the case and is completely false. And so by engaging with learning about things like writing across a curriculum and about disciplinary literacies, that it has really brought an awareness to myself that this is something that not only I struggle with, but many others in across the campus, and that we do not have to go this alone, that sort of by coming together, and I think that was really the strength of the Institute, is bringing together those of us from the university with the students that are, or with the teachers, and being able to engage in conversations and see that we're all in it together, and that we all owe our students to be able to help them to become better writers. So again, I think this was really the most eye-opening experience that I had, which is to realize that it is a very wrong yet easy way to just sort of say, if you have students that are not able to write well, it's someone else's fault. It really is my responsibility as an educator, and to work with those as to work with others as well that are all about student success.
Right. Yeah. Ethan, you had a story that seemed to kind of be along those lines based on your experiences with doing some project-based learning with a colleague. I was wondering if you could share a bit about that.
Sure. I guess I'll answer that question in two ways. First, I think what Kelly is talking about, and in relation to the question you're asking, I think that there's a broader issue there. At what point is there a point at which writing should stop being taught? I think the answer is probably there's not. And are there classes in which writing should not be taught? And it seems like writing and these habits of mind that we're talking about that are related to writing are things that should be taught throughout schooling. So, when I talked to my friend the other day, who is, he's a PhD and he's a chemist, essentially, a successful chemist. And, I asked him in preparation for this conversation, I said, so, how does writing go for you? And how did you learn how to write in order to write your dissertation? He said, I didn't. He said, I was terrible at it, and nobody ever taught me. I would turn in drafts to professors, and they would just hand them back to me and say, this is terrible. And I would say, well, what's terrible about it? Well, it just doesn't make sense, So there wasn't, he wasn't getting good feedback even as a doctoral student. So, it's just a really interesting issue all throughout to me. But my experience that you were asking me about, I think, has to do with inquiry-based learning, which is something that I've tried to use quite in as many of my classes as possible. And so I have mainly been a social studies teacher, but I've also taught quite a few English classes, and I've always also my continuing education has been in English, because Cathy, of course, always gave me the freedom to pursue social studies ideas in English classes, right? So I've always brought this idea of inquiry-based learning into my history classroom. And this past year, I did a project with my co-teacher. She was the science teacher and math teacher, and I was the ELA and history teacher. And so we combined and did a project on energy. And she's an excellent teacher and always kept very good track of the objectives for the unit, and always kept very good track through both formative and summative assessments to see were her students meeting the objectives that were laid out at the beginning of the unit. And so this inquiry-based project around energy was very messy, and messy in a good way. And what she said at the end of it was, my data throughout wasn't really neat. I didn't have a really solid bead on what every single kid was learning and whether they were getting every objective along the way. But she said at the end of the unit, once they had completed their projects and she did the final summative assessment, that particular unit on energy and electricity, they had learned far more than in any previous unit. So I think the point was they were able to get and achieve a great deal of objectives through, I guess, what we'd call an inquiry or conceptually based education rather than focusing on the objectives throughout. It was messy, but they got a ton out of it because they were reading, researching, organizing the research and writing about it in lots of different ways, creating infographics and writing research papers and reflections. So and my partner teacher and I did try to do as much of what it turns out is this disciplinary approach to teaching and learning. So that's one instance, but a ton out of it, and they learned a lot, and they worked very hard. So those are good things.
Yeah, for sure. Cathy, you had an interesting anecdote about the thinking of educators who came into this program and sort of how it morphed and changed over the course of their conversations and working together over the summer. Because I'm thinking, even listening to what you were saying, Ethan, and I think it was mirrored in what Kelly was saying, that a lot of times when it comes to thinking about writing in different disciplines, people who are not traditionally teaching a subject where they feel like writing is a key part of what they have to teach feel a little bit like, why me? At least that's something that I feel like I experience, particularly in when we get into like middle school and high school. I'm a science teacher. Why is this something that I have to do? Why does this fall underneath the umbrella of what I'm responsible for? Or, okay, we're going to do a lab report, the end. But in that example that you gave, Ethan, there were lots of different genres that people were composing in, it sounds like, depending on the purposes of what they had to write for. In that project, they probably crossed a variety of different disciplines because of the kinds of pieces that they were creating. So, Cathy, did you experience resistance from some people who, when they first come into the program, how does that thinking morph and change over time?
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is, so on the first day of the Institute, so there's like 43 of us, right, in a room.
Mm-hmm.
There's about 8 college people, and the rest are middle and high school people. They're from all over, different kinds of school districts with different kinds of demands and different levels of rigidity in those. So on the first day, one of the first questions that a teacher asked was, so I have a question for the college people. I just want you to tell me how many pieces of evidence we need to have per paragraph in order for it to be really college-ready writing. And I sort of had a gulping moment, where this is her reality, right? This is what that teacher was in the midst of. This were her deep questions, because that's how everything was going in her school. So by the end of the Institute, on our last day, when we were talking about all this, we had such great conversations and so many different ways of thinking about teaching writing and learning writing and what we could do as teachers ourselves. Another teacher raised her hand and said, so this is what I want to know at this point. Now that we know all of these things about what it really means to be college ready, why are we doing it this way? Mm-hmm. What's going on in high schools that's making us do this, and what can we do to change things? Mm-hmm. So I think that was sort of a telling moment of how much people had learned. It doesn't mean that at the end of it everybody had all the answers, but I think everybody at the end of it had some different ways of thinking about it and felt pretty inspired to want to think about doing more and what they can do to push for some change in their own schools.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just in your response right there, it's making me think about the idea that if the kinds of writing we do vary so much by discipline, when is it the right time to start teaching students about this? And I'll open that up to everybody.
For me, I think earlier the better. But of course, for geography, remember that it is under the social studies. So obviously I understand that it is dependent upon the teacher themselves as far as what is their interest in geography, how much geography education have they already had, and how do they include geography in social sciences or social studies as a whole. So I am really privileged because I get a lot of education students that are interested in the geographic aspect of the social studies, and that I really feel proud that they're in at least one, if not more, of my classes, because I know that then they are bringing that discipline, and maybe that will be part of the forefront of how they teach and develop their curriculum.
Well, I can jump in on one thing. I know Ethan may have something to say on this too, but I think starting the earlier you can, the better, because I think the idea of flexibility, if I thought about all the habits of mine that are important, flexibility to me is the most important one. And so for students to start thinking about there is not one way of writing, there are so many ways of writing, and it depends on the discipline and the genre within the discipline, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll share something from, this is not my example, it's from a book, a new NCT book called Entering the Conversations, and it's by Stock, Schillinger, and Stock. So Andrew Stock is an elementary teacher, and he has this amazing example in there in his study of wolves with the kids, elementary school, starting these kids thinking about what does it mean to be a biologist? What does it mean to go out and do wildlife field notes? What does it mean to do that? So the kids, when you see the book, the cover is of all these kids dressed in their best wildlife costumes, and in their sleeping bags, and with hats on and all this. And Andrew got them the kind of paper that you use when you do field notes. It has to be waterproof, right, in case it rains. And so the kids are really immersed in what does it mean to write field notes, and they talk about what does it mean to do that kind of wildlife field notes. What did they learn from that? And then within this unit, then he did like all disciplines in this, but they switch eventually to doing like, okay, so what happened to the wolves? What happened? Why have these laws been developed? And so they start to write legal kinds of things when they move to social studies. And what do they do with that? And these are elementary kids, and they certainly could handle that, and they could see why you changed your writing for a different kind of purpose and for a different kind of discipline was very much a part of who they are from little kids. And I think if you can start it there, the kids are going to be able to do this as they move along. And I know, Ethan, you've taught middle school, and you started doing this at middle school level, right, with kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's funny because I think that it's almost more natural for kids at an early age to do things that are disciplinary. Or at least maybe naturally as educators, that's how we structured things, because as kids are coming up through the earlier grades, there's so much of a focus on just the soft skills and survival and in school and liking school, enjoying your education. Teachers spend so much more time trying to engage kids. I remember I went and visited my brother's classroom, and I can't remember, he might have been teaching 4th grade at the time. And they were doing a mock government and their government ran for probably the whole school year. And so, they were coming to me with proposals that they had written and asking for me to, sign to have this proposal go to the legislature in order to be considered to become a law. I mean, so they were doing all kinds of different disciplinary things that real governments supposedly do. And then it seems like they get to high school, and then there's so much focus on content that some of these disciplinary actions take a back seat because, hey, now things really matter. We've got to test you, and these tests matter, and we've got to be able to quantify your learning, and the easiest way to quantify it is by doing it in these ways, and then that'll determine your grade point, and it'll go on your transcript, and it's almost easier to do, or at least classically that's what's happened. But I think there is, in talking to lots of history teachers, throughout the country and locally, a lot of people are talking more about not teaching history as this march through time where you learn facts and dates, but more as a series of skill sets and habits that you develop to act as and be an historian, and to generate something at the end of your inquiry that looks like what an historian does. And in my experience, both in high school and in middle school, kids are far more engaged when you do that, and then they like it. I spent a lot of years teaching kids to hate history, and I look back and just say, well, I was very efficient at delivering information to them, but I was also very efficient at getting them to want to do something other than get into what I think is a really cool subject. So I don't see there as being an age that is too early. I mean, even with my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old, we you know, we go outside and capture fireflies, and then we go inside and we write down observations that we have about, you know, how light was it outside, what was the temperature like, and those things come naturally to them. They have fun and they do it. So I don't think any time is too early.
Yeah. All right. Duly noted. There is, in contrast to that, though, although I do not hear this argument as much actually about the new social studies standards, and I feel like it's pretty explicit in those that a focus on disciplinary literacy. I think it's actually like even sort of a pull-out strand that's within those. But there is a certain public argument, I would say even amongst educators, saying that the Common Core state standards are damaging the creative and vibrant parts of literacy, particularly as they relate to writing. And so I wonder, in the context of all of these comments, what you might have to say in response to that.
So I'll start, and then Ethan might give a different answer, and Kelly might give a different answer. So here's the thing. I think it's good and bad. I think it's good that the Common Core focused on writing in all the subject areas. That's a good thing, right? We can't complain about that. That's a good thing. But the bad thing, I think, is the way that it is interpreted too much is sort of this cookie cutter way of doing it. And here's an example. It's this idea that writing is interchangeable, right? Because of the way they're grouped together in the Common Core, you know, science, history and social studies, and other technical subjects all grouped together under the standards. So a teacher friend of mine was telling me that in her school, for example, that has a fairly rigid interpretation of this, that in every subject, so say a kid takes 6 classes, so in each of her 6 classes over the course of a trimester, so 3 times over the course of the trimester, they have to write something that is in this sort of fill-in-the-blank 5-paragraph essay time. So 6 classes, 3 times a trimester, 3 trimesters a year. So by the end of this, the kids have written that many 5-paragraph essays that are basically just write an argument but insert social studies content. Write this argument but insert math content. Write this argument but, you know, you get the idea. So, you know, that's not writing. Surprise, surprise, the kids hate writing. But this is sort of this idea of what's been happening in that school to think that they're following what Common Core wants. So while the emphasis on writing in all subject areas is good, I think we need to think about this in more productive ways. We have to think of, I think, the kind of test writing that you might have to do from that is a genre, right? Let's learn how to do that, but that's just a genre. That's not all there is of writing. There's way more of writing than that. So I think we need to figure out how we can build upon what's happening in the Common Core. Think about the beliefs about the teaching of writing. Think about the framework for success to make writing a bigger, fuller thing. I think, you know, Kelly could speak to that, or any of the college people could speak to that, of how do we feel when the students come in and only know how to do that 5-paragraph essay and think that that is the be-all and end-all of writing. Kelly, you're nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. This institute was a real awakening for me, and my aha moment was when I discovered why I kept receiving 5-paragraph essays or research papers that were basically an extended version of the 5-paragraph essay. And to be able to say, okay, it was a real aha moment for me, because now that I know where it originates from, I can better serve my students to help explain to them what are the different genres and what are the different types of writing that geographers engage in that is different, and to show them strategies on how they can achieve this as well. So it's, for me, again, I would say that it has been an awakening, and it then forces me to up my game, to say, okay, how can I better educate my students on how to engage in writings that real geographers engage in.
I think it's an opportunity for collaboration. You know, when you see that these students are all showing up writing 5-paragraph essays, we know that that's not right, and so there has to be collaboration between university professors and the high school and middle school and down the line, those teachers, to say, okay, well, because I think that we're in survival mode. You know, we've got new standards and new classes and new stuff being thrown at us all the time, and so it's easier sometimes to just say, okay, fine, we'll do this. You know, this is classically what's been done, so we'll do that. And so there has to be this collaboration to say, actually, there's more to it than these 5 paragraphs. And yeah, I mean, I think the Institute is that opportunity, but I think this problem shows us that there is a need for that collaboration. And I think on a broader level, the problem that people seem to have with the Common Core, part of it is, you know, a political problem that I think is beyond our scope today, and part of it is that anytime new standards come out, part of the issue is how they're applied. You know, okay, here's a list of, you know, 80 things, and you have to hit these 80 things in every single unit. Well, that's not necessarily true. That's not what the document says. That's not the best way to approach actually teaching these standards and benchmarks. And I've found that since the beginning of my career. We've always had these huge documents, and people aren't actually paying attention to the best way to deliver that information. They're just going with the easiest way or the way that seems the most like how they've been doing it. So I think, you know, administrators and teachers and lead teachers kind of need to say, no, we don't have to do all of this, and we don't have to do all of it exactly like this, and we do have to collaborate with people above us to say, okay, what else can we do other than this 5-paragraph thing? And that might make it more effective and, I think, more efficient and easier for everybody.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Ethan. So, but one of the other things I think is interesting about this is, so if you look at the Common Core, it talks about things like evidence. Well, one of the things we talked about and looked at is what counts as evidence in one discipline is different from what counts as evidence in another one. So to sort of have this thing that you'll show evidence is just kind of, what does that even mean? Elizabeth Mojay, who's somebody, a researcher at University of Michigan, whose stuff we have relied on, I've relied on a lot over the last few years. In one of her pieces, she has a quote, I think it actually comes from somebody else, but she quotes it in there, that if you asked what the causes of smallpox are, you would get a really different answer from a biologist and from a historian. Right? And that to me is just such a telling moment. So when you start thinking about things like, well, what does the word cause mean? What does it mean in different subject areas? What do we mean by evidence? What counts as evidence in certain subject areas? Even something as simple as, you know, as an English teacher, I was a former high school teacher too, but as an English teacher, you know, it's always never use passive voice. Passive voice is bad. Well, not in the sciences, right? Passive voice is part of the disciplinary expectation in that, and there's a whole lot of reasons why. So in the Institute, we were able to start thinking and talking about some of these kinds of things, which I think are really important and much more interesting conversations that you can also have with the students. So the students start to learn to be flexible in their writing, to understand, you know, what they mean by cause differs, and what counts as evidence differs, and what syntax you use to explain something differs because of the way people think in those disciplines. So,
yeah. Well, I would imagine that for folks who are listening who haven't been part of this project, that there might be an interest in saying, okay, that makes sense. I do think that I would like to have this conversation. Particularly, I think what's unique about your situation is that, if I'm understanding this correctly, there's a close geographical area that was where you had middle schools that fed into the high schools that potentially the students might come to your university. Was that, no, that wasn't. Not the case. Okay, all right. So it doesn't have to be that, but
yeah.
Lots of schools exist in decent proximity to institutions of higher ed. How might folks start this conversation if they wanted to have that dialogue happen? Is that the sort of thing that could be accomplished by conversations with peers that you know that are teaching in higher ed? If you happen to be a middle school teacher, are there some questions maybe that people should be using to start learning about this, or resources, places they could go to learn on their own if they don't have the benefit of an institute to attend?
Yeah, I think those conversations are important ones. I mean, if you have a National Writing Project site, that's always a good place to start for everything. I think because National Writing Project, you know, has connections to universities, so I think that's always a good place to start. I think for us, part of what made it work so well was we had faculty who had gone through a writing across the curriculum program, and a lot of universities have that. So I think getting in contact with a university that has that kind of program would be really important too, because the faculty members we included in this were people who were thinking hard about writing. You can hear that from listening to Kelly. These are people who are really interested in thinking about writing themselves and thinking about how they become better teachers of writing. So to see if your university has that, I think, is really important. We also managed to have a lot of faculty members who are not in that, teach up, blame down mode, which I think is kind of important, right? You guys all know what I mean by that, right? So the college person who says, oh, if only they taught them better in high school, and the high school, if only they taught them better in middle school, all the way down. And the sort of teach up moment too, like starting in kindergarten, that we're preparing people to be college ready. I mean, these are not what the folks are talking about. We're talking about collaborative measures to think and talk together. So I think that that's really important. At our institute, we had people from lots of different school districts, but I think what was cool is most of them came as a team. Not all of them, but most of them came as a team, so there would be representation from different subject areas, and also usually somebody who was either the language arts consultant or the person who was charged with trying to do more content area literacy. So getting a team of people together to talk and think about that is really good. And I think the other thing is, though we made it a really structured institute, we really built in lots of time for talking. So we had like things that we did, things that we read, exercises that we tried, invitations that we did, but you just need lots of time to talk, because that's, I think, where most of this comes out. So I'd say, yeah, look at a National Writing Project site, look and see if there's a writing across a curriculum program at your university, at your local university, and I think there could be some movement forward towards that.
All right. Well, hopefully that will spark some curiosity, and hopefully we'll hear more stories like this. I cannot believe that we're nearing the end of our 45 minutes. These conversations always fly, but I'd like to hear from each one of you before we wrap up. Based on your experience this summer, and I know I believe maybe all of you have been doing this for more than 1 year. But here we are in a new year, starting a new school year. What's something else that you want to learn? What's something that you're interested in exploring during this school year? An idea that was sparked this summer from your experiences in the Disciplinary Literacies Institute?
I think that I'm hoping to have my students work on a writing project that goes across the whole school year. Something that's much bigger, that feels like it could be more, I hate to say realistic, but something that is more representative of the discipline as a whole. So something they can start at the beginning of the school year and really work with and revise and do a lot of research and have something that they can really be proud of and maybe publish in some sort of way. So that's a goal. I don't know if it'll happen this year, but we shall see.
All right, we'll come back and find out.
I do have, for myself, I have two things that I'd really like to work on. And number one is I'd like to talk to my colleagues in the department about the Institute and about what some of the conversations that I had with my teacher colleagues and how eye-opening it was as an experience, and how we really can best be a strong department by maintaining and working on our relationship with them. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that has come out of the Institute is I'm going to be working with teachers from the Ypsilanti community schools on putting together a new set of curriculum that teaches social studies through the lens of geotourism. So I'm really excited about this.
And I actually talked to one of those teachers today who's so excited about it too, Kelly. So I think for me right now, my project this year is to really study everything that we've learned so far about this, to really think about this in some deeper ways. But we're also going to, in February, be putting on Disciplinary Literacies Showcase at Eastern Michigan University, kind of inspired by NCT's National Day on Writing. And we're going to have well, it's still in the planning stage, but the goal is to have something that teachers from disciplines can come to, students can come to, and try to see more about what does it mean to really be college-ready writers, and at the same time, what does it mean to write in a discipline. So we'll have like workshops for students, workshops for teachers, lots of displays of things. So that's what I'm really working on, so we can really start to study what the differences are, what's the same, you know, what are the things of good writing that go across all the disciplines, what are the things that vary a little bit. So that's what we're working on.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I mean it. I'd love to follow up and hear about all of these projects in, I guess, 9 months from now. See where they are. See where you're moving towards. Thank you, everybody, for sharing with us today. And it's exciting to learn not only about this project, but also to hear each of you articulate your own evolving thinking about what literacy of the disciplines, the disciplinary literacies, thank you, Cathy has helped me to put that plural in the right place, how that affects what you do in your own individual context. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everybody for tuning in. All of the resources from this conversation will be included in that showcase along the side, and this discussion will be automatically recorded and available via YouTube and also via the Google Plus page where you might have tuned in to the discussion. So thank you for joining us for NCTE On Air, and we look forward to talking with you again the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.